Right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing our tafsir, and let's see what we had done last time. And certainly, of course, we're still in Surah Al-An'am. That would make it within this page. Let's look at this page. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ آزَرَ أَتَتَّخِذُ أَصْنَامًا آلِهَةً إِنِّي أَرَاكَ وَقَوْمَكَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. So we went in details in details with وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلِيَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ. And we talked about the word malakut. But there's one thing. I felt that some of the sisters are a little confused in regards to, well, what is the object of the whole thing that we are actually reading? So we did some comparison between this portion, this portion of the surah. Let's look at it right there. And we also compared it with Surah An-Najm. But let me speak a little bit about the object really quick. I just want you to get to, I guess, get to that idea that we're trying to get to. So when we speak about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, we did go in details. Is this the story of Prophet Ibrahim's personal journey to getting to certainty and basically first coming with this journey or this search and then finding eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then getting the wahi later? Or is this not a personal search, but in fact a personal experience with da'wah? Okay, a personal experience with that. So we did talk about the majority of the scholars actually saying that prophets would never fall in shirk or even in kufr, and that they actually were infallible from shirk or kufr from early childhood. So a majority of the scholars regarded that this is the story of his personal experience in da'wah and not personal experience in search of certainty. The other thing I wanted to say was, of course, regardless of whether it's a personal experience in search of truth or certainty, or whether it is personal experience in da'wah and presenting da'wah, I think what the theme, the most important thing that we can get to is understanding that certainty, yes, you can have your brain get you to a certain level of understanding of basically your own intelligence, get you to a certain level of knowing some truth, but truth actually, at least let's say, your full understanding of truth is actually coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / al-wahi. Does that mean blind faith? It doesn't mean blind faith, but when we speak about understanding where and what is considered as the basis for truth. Let me give you an example. When we look at for example, the Kant and and where is truth and all of that. In fact, by the way, this was also the same idea that al-Ghazali or al-Ghazali, different ways of saying his name. That was the same idea that he was also, at least the same concept. He was also practicing or telling us the journey of his book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. Let me tell you just a little story about Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal is approximately in 180 pages. Okay. The story of Al-Ghazali or Al-Ghazali, he basically was, number one, orphan. He was an orphan. Both of his parents had died. Both of his parents had died when he was just a young child. And in Baghdad, certainly that makes him from Iraq. And in Baghdad, there was a government, okay? For orphans, they basically would be subsidized by the government, but in order to be included in that subsidy, you would basically have to be included within the orphanage. You would have to also follow the system. So it was an education system, but along with the education system, you would basically get food, shelter, and basically clothes, and give you the different things that are needed for you. Okay, so that was al-Ghazali. So, in other words, he basically tells you the story that they had no food, no clothes, no shelter, no one to take care of them. So they basically were instructed by the government that they needed to enter this subsidized living and basically get into that system. So he does get into that system, and within that system, he excels by far from being the student to later being the actual dean for that school. We're not talking about any school, but we're talking about a school that is considered a university. So at the time, it was like Harvard today. It was a Nizamiya school where they would learn fiqh, usul, and in fact, included within that is philosophy. Okay. Well, he was actually considered, yes, Shafi'i madhab, and one of the top figures that wrote on philosophy. But there was one topic that was troubling him, which is the topic related to epistemology. What is epistemology? Epistemology is trying to basically lay out what acts as a valid resource for knowledge, what makes knowledge, where does knowledge begin at? Where does it begin in? Where does it begin at? How do we define knowledge? What is a definitive fact that I can basically consider that as the foundation of truth, and then based on that, basically build other pieces of information and so forth. Now, al-Ghazali, he basically writes al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, but before he writes al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, even though he was considered the dean for a Nizamiya school, but he had a course of severe depression. This severe depression led him to leaving the school and isolating himself completely from everyone, and even moving out of Baghdad and going to Al-Quds. This severe depression lasted 4 years. What was it about? It was trying to get to the answer of what actually makes the foundation of knowledge. He didn't doubt Islam, but he was trying to understand this philosophical argument and how he basically breaks it down and how he understands it. But this philosophical argument took him 4 years, and eventually he wrote his journey in the book Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. And in it, he does talk about doubt, he does talk about skepticism, he does talk about epistemology, and to make the story short, he does talk about math and all of that. And remember, he's actually a philosophy major as well. So he was not only specialized in fiqh, but usul, but in falsafa and philosophy, and specialized in basically, you could say, almost 15 and 17 and 18 PhDs. That's exactly what al-Ghazali was. And yet, he was trying to figure out a way from faith. Is there any possible way, using our own intelligence, and that we can actually consider that using our own intelligence, that can get us to certainty? Eventually, he said he considered that it was impossible to get to certainty of anything unless it comes from al-Wahy. What does that mean? that your brain, the human intelligence could only get us to having a certain amount of knowledge, a certain amount of realization that this world could not be created on its own, that there is a purpose behind life, that there is this is the only thing that you can basically get to. In fact, he even doubted his own existence. Like, do I even exist? How do I prove that I even exist? What, did he live that doubt himself where it was like, do I actually exist? Really? Am I there? No, he was not existing that. He was basically trying to get to the points philosophically. And then at the end, he said the way that he got to truth, certainty, and all of that is basically, he said, it was one simple thing. نور قذفه الله في قلبي. It was just the light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sparked into my heart. And therefore, he basically got to that point that وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلِيَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ. How do we get to yaqeen? That's the question. How do we get to yaqeen? So there's no way to get to yaqeen unless the person is basically Nuri Ibrahim, unless the person not only has mental vision / intelligence, and basically the intelligence to recognize this world, recognize creation and all of that, but also has malakut as-samawati wal ard, where they recognize that this universe cannot be created on its own, and that there's a purpose behind it, but that's not enough. Your brain is never capable of going farther than, let's say, researching and studying materialistic things that you would see in this universe. The materialistic things that you would see in the universe, they basically can only give you one thing, is that this function of this universe is far magnificent than running on its own. But are you capable through your intelligence, knowing and understanding and basically figuring out who God is, what is God, what is behind the universe? The answer is no, because these materialistic things are creatures. The Lord Almighty is beyond creation, and therefore, when you look at كَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was given certainly the mental vision, and that's how he managed to basically get into this kind of debate and let them see that if there is something that is small, then if there's something that is bigger, then that basically is built on, we're talking about power, we're talking about presence, we're talking about energy, we're speaking about force. So that's what Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was demonstrating. When he was looking at, notice that he didn't talk about tree, for example. Did he not talk about trees or probably their own selves, but talked about moon, stars, galaxies, these areas that are really distant. He was trying to tell them, I want you to talk about the origin of creation. Now, they were intelligent to recognize that the origin of creation is not on Earth, but is in space. So that's why they basically worship the stars, the moon, and everything, but they recognize that there's no way that the originator of this universe, this Earth, is on Earth, because the space is far more magnificent. So they were getting somewhere, but then they lost the goal, and then they lost basically they lost where they could actually get to the right answer. You know, it's kind of like you've got a certain answer, you got this far with the right answer, but then you basically basically confused how to then complete the rest to get to the right conclusion. So Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was using their hypothesis to demonstrate to them that their hypothesis had gone wrong, because the energy, the force, the presence, that basically is telling us that this basically, whether we're speaking about moon or whether we're speaking about sun, whether we're speaking about planet, that these things, one, if you're talking about mass, you're talking about volume, you're talking about presence, you're talking about what it contains from energy and what it contains, well, then this isn't the most. And certainly this isn't the most. We keep going from one basically celestial being to another, and then what he was trying to tell them is that there is something even far more magnificent than the sun itself. That's what he wanted to get to. And that in order to get to you to what is actually far more magnificent than the sun itself, then he comes to إِنِّي وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. I had turned my face to the one that created the heavens and the earth. What did he want to say? That I had turned my face to the one that created all of this, because even going through the idea of energy, force, basically power, basically how, because if you're talking about something that is kawkab, so you're seeing a small light, but this is a bigger light, and this is basically the biggest light. If you're talking about presence, this was present, but then it went away. This was present for a longer period of time, but then it went away. This was the longest in presence within the day. Okay, let's see the other one. This is containing certain power. This is even more powerful based on what we could see. This basically contains the most power. So if we could see, going from less to the most, then what he was saying was, well, since these cannot be what created the universe, then I would only have one option, which is to turn to the one that created the heavens and the earth, because this would be something that is not a creature, but a creator. That's why he said Hanifan. Why? Because their response was going to be, we didn't deny the existence of God. They didn't deny the existence of God. They just basically chose something that they could see, something that they could relate to come as a resemblance of God. What resembles God? And what they would consider as, yes, this resembles God, as to what they would consider. And then Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was teaching them that these things do not resemble God, and therefore وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ حَنِيفًا, because they said, well, okay, maybe one doesn't resemble God, but we'll basically get a number of these different celestial beings and consider that they all resemble God in total. Since this one is lacking and that one's lacking and that one's lacking something, we'll basically put them all together, and that way we can basically complete one another and not feel that one is lacking. So وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, I'm not amongst those that would associate partners, but with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course. Okay, but we didn't actually do Tafseer al-Qurtubi, at least from this side of it. Let's look at Tafseer al-Qurtubi, inshallah, and see what we were supposed to be covering. Let's see. وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So al-Qurtubi was saying malakut is mulk, is basically the ownership of the universe. So what at least this tafsir is saying in understanding, of course, the universe, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had showed him not only, so in other words, are we really trying to understand what Prophet Ibrahim and the point that he was trying to make? So according to Tafseer al-Qurtubi, he said he was saying mulk as-samawati wal ard, that he was given the ability to see who really is one, the true creator, by knowing the true originator, by knowing the true powerful being that controls everything, and that's mulk. Okay, let's see. And certainly, well, what about why did it say, for example, كذلك نري إبراهيم ملك السماوات والأرض and not malakut? So he was saying, well, malakut is basically to show and express the magnificence of something. But I want you to look at this one. So when you look at al-mubalagha, okay, al-mubalagha in English, hyperbole, that's a form of exaggeration, okay? But we talked about this before, that in Lugha Arabiya, when we say something is for al-mubalagha, it does not mean to practice a hyperbole, meaning exaggerate the truth of what something is. It's not to exaggerate, meaning to demonstrate a volume or an exaggerated appearance in something, but it is actually to demonstrate the magnificence of something. Okay, that's al-mubalagha in Lugha Arabiya. It's to demonstrate the magnificence of something, and that's basically to help us know what we're here seeing, that some scholars speaking about al-mubalagha right there, when they talk about it, this does not mean at all that this is beyond truth. Okay, let's see. There is another qira'ah, malkut as-samawati wal ard. It's quite interesting. Malkuta. So وكذلك نري إبراهيم ملكوت السماوات والأرض in another qira'ah. Okay, let's see. And we said nuri to actually mean to show, to let him see. And we talked about seeing. Is this talking about seeing a visual seeing, or is this something, if we were to say a visual seeing, that would actually maybe give us the inference that it was similar to the day of al-Isra wal-Mi'raj? Or was it that not necessarily this type of seeing similar to like al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, but it could be that no, that there was another type of seeing, which is a visual slash intelligence that he was capable of recognizing, of seeing beyond, and that seeing beyond all of this basically led him to recognizing faith even before receiving al-Wahy. Okay, and that's why when you look at what the scholars were saying, that that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was given the ability to see all the different things in the heavens and the earth and all of that. I think we actually did talk about this one. Let's go skip this one, because I think I did talk about this one. وَلِيَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ. Why all of that? In order to be amongst al-muqinin, amongst the ones that are basically having certainty in faith. Okay, فلما جن عليه الليل رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لا أحب الآفلين. جن عليه الليل, meaning, well, okay, now we're basically right there. Now the story. فلما. I want you to look at the letter fa. The letter fa basically means something bidun tarahi. In other words, there wasn't a time lapse. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam basically gets this knowledge, but he puts that knowledge into a mission to spread. That's what that fa is teaching. He had this knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him about creation. but it didn't say walamma jannah, it said falamma jannah. So the fa here is giving me the inference that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam instantly, it didn't take him at all any time when he got to the ilm and basically the certainty in regards to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in regards to knowing creation, in regards to knowing truth, in regards to knowing all of that about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore right on the spot, right instantly, didn't take him any time to basically go and put that as his mission to let others know about the da'wah. And therefore, let's say, when the night had come, the night had, when you look at the word Jannah, the word letter Jim and Noon, whenever you see them together, we talked about this before, that actually means something is covered. Il-Jinn, he's covered, you can't see him. Il-Jannah, it's so green that it covers basically a lot of the things that are behind it. Il-Janeen is in his mother's belly, and therefore you cannot see the baby. Al-Junoon, this man or this person's insanity is basically covered. This person's not capable of completely understanding the world, and therefore, what are they? Well, they're basically insane. Al-Majnoon is insane. Anyhow, so when you look at Jannah, now we know one thing. So here, Jannah alayhi layl, when the night had basically covered him. So when because we can't say had fallen, because here the word Jannah actually means to cover. So what happened? Basically, the night and the darkness of the night had basically covered all of them. Okay. And then you could say, Ra'a kawkaba. He basically had seen a star. Is this a star or is this a planet? Is this a star or a planet? Okay. And in general, of course, al-kawkab is a planet and not a star. But we know that the sun, for example, is a star. Okay. So at the end, he basically saw a planet. And of course, what were, the scholars will actually say that he was with his, I guess, the people that he was with, and that they were, I guess, on a journey or something like that. There are other scholars that said that he himself was hidden. Now that's quite interesting. I think we talked about it before, that he himself was hidden away from basically civilization, from people, because in Namrud had basically put on an agenda to kill every newborn baby, because he had a dream that there was someone that was going to be born to take over his kingdom and all of that. So kind of similar to Prophet Musa's story. And then he basically puts on a mission. That's it. We're going to kill every single newborn baby. And then the story says, but nothing within the Muslim literature. We talked about that. Nothing within the Muslim literature to tell us the story that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was put in a cave, isolated from human beings, isolated from people, and that there was a small opening in the cave that he was capable of seeing through, and that he basically is getting into those questionings, all of that. We don't have anything that is authentic of that sort whatsoever. But this is a story in the Midrash, and we talked about that one, so no need to get into that one. Okay. All right. I'm going to skip all of that because we did talk about it. Okay. So when he said, when the night basically covers him, he sees a planet, and he said, this is Lord. Now, we did talk about this, whether it was him saying that this is Lord, or whether it was a hypothesis that was demonstrating their idea and what they were claiming. So when أفل actually means that it went away. قال لا أحب الآفلين. He said, I do not like those that would turn away, would go away. What did he want to say? If it's not there, that means the energy is basically not right now affecting us. Its energy is not there. Therefore, our rizq, therefore, our life and death, therefore, it is not what controls the system, and certainly not what is considered as the biggest celestial being, and therefore it basically is a part of the universe and not the whole universe. It is part of the universe and not the whole universe. Therefore, there's something bigger than the universe. Okay, so that's when he continues with this hypothesis. When he had seen the moon, and the word bazigha, what does the word bazigha actually mean? So al-buzugh basically means when something is appearing. Okay, when something is appearing, so you've got suddenly appearing, and then all of a sudden, the moon starts coming out from the horizon, and this is al-buzugh. When it comes out and it's like just a little glimpse of light, and then it starts growing and glowing and glowing even further, and that's basically al-buzugh. Okay. What did I skip too much? Okay. Where is it? Where's the rest? Is this missing? 138. رأى كوكبا وضعا قال هذا ربي فلما جن عليه الليل. Oh dear, where are we? We did talk about all of this, by the way. Oh dear, hold on. We're going to get to there. Okay, here we go. فلما رأى القمر بازغا قال هذا ربي. When he had seen the moon بازغا, like we said, البزوغ is basically when something is rising, when something is coming out, as if it's coming out of a small opening. And of course, within this whole light that already the night had basically unfolded and basically covered the horizon with, the moon comes up, and he basically says, well, if this is actually coming in the middle of all of this darkness, then in that situation, we would basically consider that as something that is far more powerful. Why? Because it broke the darkness that this energy had filled. So this comes in, since it broke this darkness, this energy right there, then in that situation, this basically comes in as even more powerful. So he says, لَإِن لَمْ يَهْدِنِي رَبِّي لَأَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الضَّالِينَ. If I am not guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I would be amongst those that are living in a delusion, amongst those that are living the delusion, the illusion. And then when he would see the sun as bazigha, the same thing. When he sees the sun basically out, that's when he says, لَإِن لَمْ يَهْدِنِي رَبِّي, at the end. First he says, قال هذا ربي هذا أكبر. This is even bigger. And we said bigger is not necessarily only in size, but meaning more powerful. Okay, meaning more powerful. And it's basically to demonstrate to them that if this is bigger, then therefore it has a bigger force, and it has a bigger power, then it deserves worship, then it deserves basically for us to basically consider it. But here's the question: did they actually worship the sun? Did they worship the sun? If they did worship the sun, then was he actually getting to the same idea? No, of course not. Because right there, فَلَمَّا أَفَلَتْ, he wanted to get to them with the same pattern, that if this is gone, then it can't be God. That is gone. Then that's the hypothesis, that you considered that the sun was the greater God. Okay, why did you consider the sun the greater God? Because that one went away. or because that one didn't give you the amount of heat, the amount of force, the amount of power, the amount of light, right? Well, okay, now it's gone. Based on their hypothesis, well, the sun was the most magnificent God. But then he used the same hypothesis that he had used before and said, well, if those things cannot be God because they're smaller, because their energy basically is gone at one point, or at least their effect is gone, then therefore they cannot be the originators of life. So that's why he basically just then said, Inni bari'un mimma tushrikun. In other words, what? Because they were believing that the sun was God, that the moon was another God, that the planets were a third God, and so forth. So that's when he basically goes and announces it. Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal ard. What is wajjahtu? Wajjahtu comes from the word wajjaha. What does that mean? Wajha means, one, to face something. Two, wajha could also mean to basically direct yourself at something. Okay, what's the difference between face something and direct yourself at something? So when you say face something, we're talking about your face is basically right in mirroring basically whatever's in front of you. Okay. التوجه is talking about a goal. Okay. توجه, a goal, a path someone is taking. Okay. So now you're talking about whether physically physically having to face something, or whether we're speaking about a direction, we're speaking about a path, we're speaking about what choices we make, what ideas we carry, what ideologies we believe in. All of that would basically be considered as part of التوجه, what methodologies we use in understanding life and so forth. Okay, so when we say وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا, I faced my face to the one that created. So when you look at وجهت وجهي, why do you say وجهت وجهي, not وجهت عقلي? All right, وجهت وجهي, I would turn my face to the one that created the heavens and the earth. Why face and not aql, for example? Because when you talk about the face, you talk about whether your vision, your hearing, your everything that basically is included about your own identity. What you are facing is basically going to be your own identity, and that would also include certainly what the ears process, what the ears process, what the eyes process, and all of that is basically processed in the brain. Okay, so when he says وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, meaning my worship, the tawheed, basically my faith in God, is all going to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is all directed at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, لِأَنَّهُ أَظْهَرُ مَا يُعْرَفُ بِهِ صَاحِبُهُ. He said, because when we're speaking about what marks and brings you the identity, it's basically going to be the face. People would recognize you through your face. So he said, Hanifa. What is Hanif? The word Hanif actually means to turn away from something. Wait, turn away from something? Yes. So that's why a person with bow legs is called Ahnaf. They're not straight. Okay? I thought Hanif was to mean straight. Right. So if you're turning away from their shirk, you're basically going straight up on the right path. Okay, so what does that mean? they were following a certain crooked path. You basically turn away from their crooked path. That makes you following the straight path. Okay, away from their crooked path to following the straight path. So when you look at مَائِلًا إِلَى الْحَقِّ, if you were to say turning away from something, that would be turning away from falsehood to truth. So that, what about the ahnaf, you know, al-ahnaf actually means the ones that were worshiping God, but not the idols during the time of Jahiliyyah. Okay? They were worshiping Allah or God, whether it was Christianity or whether it was Judaism or whether it was just believing that there is a God other than the pagan idols. They called them al-ahnaf. Okay? Hanafi, you know, the Hanafi madhab is not related to this. Not related to this. Okay, has a completely different thing. Okay, it's related to Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa. They wouldn't be, they wouldn't necessarily be called the Ahnaf. The Ahnaf would be the ones that worshipped basically a god. In other words, they were deists. Okay, and not necessarily pagan. Okay, and وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. And by the way, I want you to look at this one. إِنِّي وَجَهْتُ وَجْهِيَ الَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ حَنِيفًا وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Turn my face to the one that created the heaven and the earth, and I am not a multiple polytheist. Okay? وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. I want you to look at this in Lugha Arabiya. This is أنا. Okay, if you stop at it. وَمَا أَنَا. But you cannot stop here, because if you were to stop وَمَا أَنَا, it's an incomplete sentence. So وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, and this أَنَا right there, they put you a little zero on top to tell you that when you complete the recitation, you give it a grab. وَمَا أَنَا, أَنَا, you give it a grab. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Okay, let's say, when it says وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, then what was he basically saying? I have this relationship, or at least I would turn my face, my identity is completely different. The word Hanifan is going to be different, but going towards truth. So that's what the word Hanifan actually means. Many times they would translate Hanifan as a monotheist. Okay, I guess it just became a technical term to mean a certain thing. But if we were to go back to the origin of it, Hanafa, that would mean that away from the wrong path to and heading towards the right path. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. I'm not amongst those that would be mushrikeen. وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. What is حَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ? المحاججة is to debate. So what was he trying to do? He himself was demonstrating that, but who objected to it? It was his own people. He was demonstrating basically the argument of how to come to truth. But then once he announced his identity, this is an identity, okay? Once he announced his identity, that's when they basically objected. But what did they do? In the beginning, they wanted to use حَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. This is basically telling us that they were using a debate, the debate method, a way to basically get to a certain point. قَالَ أَتُحَاجُّونِي فِي اللَّهِ وَقَدْ هَدَانِ. That's when Prophet Ibrahim عليه السلام objected to their attempt to sway him against finding the truth. But I want you to look at this one. He said, قَالَ أَتُحَاجُّونِي فِي اللَّهِ وَقَدْ هَدَانِ. And he just said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me. What does that let us know? Yes, he did demonstrate, let's call it through basically the ayat, and basically through the different things that happened, whether through the night or the moon, etc. He was letting them know that there is a certain idea, whether it's math or whether it's understanding physics or whatever it is. He was letting them see at least the implications in what hypothesis that we can get to. But he then got to one thing, وَقَدْ هَدَانِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had guided me. So what does that let us know? That Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam got to al-Wahi, and when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, got to al-Wahi, that's when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had basically considered, one, that he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he was given the ilm from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore true certainty only comes with al-Wahi, only comes through al-Wahi. وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ. That's when, of course, they started using force to sway him away from truth. That's when they started basically using a different method, which basically is to threaten him. And then he responds, وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ. I'm not in fear of what you associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course. That's why he used the word وَسِعَ رَبِّي. Why وَسِعَ? Because this is ضَاقَ. Okay, what's the difference? Wasi'a actually means to be encompassing of something, to encompass something, to be bigger than everything. That's al-wus'a. Okay? Yet, wasi'a Rabbi, that's to tell us that all the different things that you had seen, they basically are not big enough, and they would not be considered these things that are encompassing everything. They cannot encompass all of that. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encompassing everything in the universe, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that we would have to turn to. You know, that takes me back to Ayat al-Kursi. Ayat al-Kursi, it takes us to this with the same idea. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. Look at this one. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. What is لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم? It does not go into any form of weakness, any form of being tired, or any form of sleep. In other words, never awake. Okay, so what is that also supposed to tell us? With this portion of that surah, that's the same idea, that the moon, that the stars, that the light, that we would say it diminishes, meaning that the presence is not there. If it diminishes, that means it's the energy, the force, the power, the authority is not there. Number two, when you look at what الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. What is that taking us? The same thing, relating this ayah, له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض, that the Lord Almighty, to him belongs everything in the heavens and everything on earth. له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض, and everything that is on earth. That is the ownership. That is al-malakut. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه. Certainly, at the end, وما أنا من المشركين. لا أخاف ما تشركون. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده, equivalent to, why should I turn to anything to give me security? Why should I turn to anything to give me security when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives security, has the authority. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم. He would know what is in between their hands, meaning if he controls the universe, then in that situation, he would also control the past and the future. He would control time as well. If he controls time, he controls energy, he controls how everything is functioning, then he would be the only one determining the purpose behind creation. And that's why وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, he comes to the same conclusion, وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. Then the Lord Almighty basically encompasses and has the knowledge to go beyond what you would be considering probably being X or Y or Z, containing some information. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's information, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ilm goes beyond all. أَفَلَا تَتَذَكَّرُ. What is أَفَلَا تَتَذَكَّرُونَ? By the way, let's look at some of the things before we get to that one. وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. Let's look at Tafseer al-Qurtubi. When you look at حَاجَّهُ, that means that they basically went into some debate, and he said, أَتُحَاجُّونِي فِي اللَّهِ. Some scholars actually had read it, أَتُحَاجُّونِي, not أَتُحَاجُّونِي. So in other words, the noon is not mushaddada, but actually takhfif. But majority read it in a noon with a shadda. Let's say, I'm not going to get into that one. Okay. وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ, because these things cannot bring harm or benefit. إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. In other words, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills that something would harm me. But other than that, I would not be afraid. Which is equivalent to what? A hadith. يا غلام لا إني أعلمك كلمات احفظ الله يحفظك احفظ الله تجده تجاهك إذا سألت فاسأل الله وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله واعلم أن الأمة لو اجتمعوا على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله لك ولو اجتمعوا على أن يضروك بشيء لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله عليك رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف. Right? يا غلام إني أعلمك كلمات. Let's look at that hadith for a second because it's related to this one, right? يا غلام إني أعلمك كلمات, right there. Right? Let's look at it. Okay. So what does he say? This is Abdullah ibn Abbas. He said, I was behind the Prophet ﷺ one day, and then he said, oh, ghulam means son or young man. I teach you a few words. Preserve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Lord Almighty will preserve you. What does it mean to preserve Allah? What it means to preserve Allah, basically to be considerate, determined, and consistent with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. Be consistent and be determined and committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, and you will see that He's basically there for you. Why? Because the commandments themselves, the principles themselves are basically Allah's support and direction to help you find your way. إذا سألت فاسأل الله. Those moments that you make a dua, you seek anything. Why? Because whether you feel lonely or whether because you are trying to figure something out, he says, فاسأل الله, then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِذَا اسْتَعَنْتَ فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ. And if you seek support, you seek any form of getting that support, then do it through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And know that even if all the people were to benefit you with anything, they would not be benefiting you with anything unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed it for you. And even if they were to gather to harm you in anything, they would not be capable of harming you with anything unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed it for you. Therefore, know that all the pens that were basically to write your future, your past, basically everything about you was already written and already decreed, and jaffat as-suhuf, and all the different tablets. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had written everything about life and about the future is already written, already ordained. So in other words, do not fear people. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for you will still happen. So that's why Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he said, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills this harm to basically take place. وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge surpasses and basically encompasses all knowledge. Therefore, it's beyond. أَفَلَا تَتَذَكَّرُونَ. You know, it's quite interesting. He'd say, وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ قُوَّةً. But he said, عِلْمًا. He'd say, وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ in power. But he said knowledge. Why? Why knowledge and not emphasize on power, or maybe emphasize on ownership? Because when you have the complete knowledge of something, then you basically have all the power over it. When you have the knowledge over everything, that means you know the past, you know the future, you know how it functions, you control every little piece of thing about it, and therefore you would basically have even more than power. Ilm itself is basically all the power. Ilm itself is all the power. أفلا تتذكرون وكيف أخاف ما أشركتم به. And of course, when you look at the ayah, وَكَيْفَ أَخَافُ مَا أَشْرَكْتُمْ بِهِ, this isn't a question. He's not asking them, how am I going to be? No, this is basically لِلتَّعَجُّب. This is basically لِلْإِنْكَارِ. It's an exclamation mark. It's basically telling them, well, you know, why would I actually be afraid of anything that you might be putting forward? Because I would ask you to just think of who basically controls the universe. If he controls the universe, then he controls everything that is beyond it. If he controls everything that is beyond it, then in that situation, he should be the one that I would be fearful of, and not anything that you think that if you had the power to probably impose or probably harm me in, that doesn't make you God. In other words, when we're speaking about fear, when we're speaking about hope, when we're speaking about security, when we're speaking about what we turn to in fear, hope, worship, and basically rizq and everything in our life, we would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what he was demonstrating for them, basically. That all that you would say, it's basically fear, creation, rizq, power, malakut. That's all part of al-malakut. Because al-malakut includes all of that. Includes basically encompassing something with knowledge. Il-malakut, that you recognize the implication of it, that you should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since the implication is that he basically determines why everything was created, and determines basically the knowledge about its own creation, and basically the time that relates to it, and the forces that come with it, and how to take away the force and how to put in the force, how to give it energy, how to take out energy. To give it energy means give it life. To take out energy means to give it death. Okay, then in that situation, the one to control life, death, benefit, harm, rizq, taking away rizq, then that is al-malakut. That's basically the one that has the malakut as-samawati wal-ard. Then that's the one that has all the ownership, all the power, all the authority over the heavens and the earth. Okay, so inshallah, we're going to stop right here. Okay, inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow, but tomorrow it's actually going to be a lot more exciting because we're going to talk about the theme that all these ayat were actually, all these ayat were trying to get us to. Okay, we were just really getting a sip of that. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll get into further details about الذين آمنوا ولم يلبسوا إيمانهم بظلم أولئك لهم الأمن وهم مهتدون. Okay, we'll get into that details inshallah. وتلك حجتنا آتيناها إبراهيم على قومه نرفع درجات من نشاء إن ربك حكيم عليم. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. If there are any questions, inshallah, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Okay, what I'll do, I'll stop the recording